to go ahead and just share it today. And let me just mention a few things in terms of the purpose of this interview. First of all, it's to demonstrate the power of God, the power of His grace and truth in our lives, and to His glory. That's our fervent prayer, is that this morning's testimony will glorify God and not any person. It's also to help people have hope, that God can help them with their spiritual struggles. We meet people all the time who need more hope. They are feeling overwhelmed with the things that are going on in their lives and what they're struggling with, and we hope that Jane's testimony will give them hope. Also, that people would feel more comfortable getting help with their struggles. Again, sometimes it feels like kind of going to the dentist, where I hate going to the dentist, and I don't go to the dentist unless I'm in a lot of pain. And then I finally say, okay, I'll go to the dentist. Getting help with our spiritual struggles oftentimes feels the same way. We wait until it gets so painful that, we're willing to go. And Jane's testimony can uniquely illustrate all of these things. I might mention that I'm actually involved in editing a book that's going to be published about counseling. I won't go into how that all happened, but this is a guy who is probably at the forefront of the fastest growing method or process of helping people overcome spiritual struggles in their life, and we use a modified version of that here at New Life Community Church. And when this author asked for testimonies, I submitted Jane's, and he said, I want to publish that one. I want that one in my book. And I would think this guy's traveled all over the world and has counseled people all over the world, and I would think he'd met plenty of Janes, but evidently he hasn't. I certainly haven't met very many Janes. I haven't met any Janes. This is a very unique thing here, and we're just glad to have her share her testimony. So we'll go ahead and start here. We have some prepared questions, and I just want to encourage both of you to ad-lib here this morning. If something comes to mind that you feel like would be helpful, please feel free to share it. Jane, we have all had people tell us that their experiences are just too horrible, too shameful to talk about, and that we'll be shocked by what they have to share, and that we've never heard anything worse than what happened to them. And my response is always, I doubt it. And the reason I can say it is because of you. Nobody's going to shock me. Nobody is going to share something that overwhelms me because of what I've experienced with you. And so starting at a very young age, could you just share the parts of your story that would help people to know that if really, really bad things have happened to them, that they are not unique and they are not alone? Turn it on. There you go.
Okay, now it's on. Well, I just want to say, first of all, that this was all just kind of normal to me, and I didn't think there was anything particularly big deal about that, even though I'm a social worker and have probably heard a lot of stories. As a child, I certainly didn't think that it was anything abnormal. But kind of in brief, what happened when I was around 6 years old, my parents had gotten divorced a couple years earlier, and we went on visitation to my dad's house. And when I was around 6, for a reason that I thought, I must be really special that he wants me to come over there alone. But what ended up happening is that he began to sexually abuse me, and also there was a lot of physical violence involved. And I didn't know anything about sex. Remember, I'm 50 plus years old, and back then nobody talked about it or ever didn't teach kids about what was appropriate touch and not appropriate touch, or what you even do about it. But even though I didn't understand what it was, I still had all the same feelings that anybody who has been sexually abused has, the feelings of shame and violation, that something's wrong with you. And then on top of it, my dad would threaten, if I told about anything that happened there, that I wouldn't be able to go home, that I have a sister who's about 16 months older than me, that he would have my sister come instead, or that my mom wouldn't want me. And he would do things like hold a lighter up to my skin and threaten if I would tell, that he would burn me, or that he would smack me or throw me across the room or something and say that it's going to be a lot worse if you ever tell anybody.
And just remember, she's 6 or 7 years old here.
So, of course, I did not. And I'm not sure what I would have even told people except for that it hurt. But I also I went to Catholic school, actually all the way through high school. And they teach you in Catholic school that you can tell the priest anything. You go to this confession thing where you're supposed to confess your sins, and you have to do it on a routine basis. It's part of being Catholic. But they told us that we could tell the priest anything. And so when I was in second grade, I decided that, well, maybe that I should tell him, and just that I was being hurt. I'm not even sure exactly what I said, but we were in Catholic school and the church was right next to it, and we'd go over one at a time while school was going on to do the confession with the priest and then come back and the next kid would go. But anyway, I told the priest, I know I told him that I was being hurt. He asked some questions and stuff. Well, what ended up happening is that the priest ended up sexually abusing me.
In the confessional.
But I was just in second grade and stuff, and I'd get really upset when I had to go to the confessional thing and would throw up and all this other stuff. I wasn't the only girl, because there were 2 other girls in my class that reacted the same way. And I don't know what the nun thought about it, but she eventually didn't make us go when that particular priest was there. But then, when I was a little bit older, I'm actually not even sure what happened that precipitated this. It happened to my brother, too, so it wasn't just me. That something happened between my parents, and I had to go live with my grandma and uncle for about a year. And after I was there for a few weeks, my uncle also began to sexually abuse me. This is my dad's brother. Again, and it was something that happened every day, and there was also a lot of violence involved with it. So by the time, and then I did get to eventually come home when I was, after about a year, so I was about 11 then. And the good thing about it is that I came back to a home that felt stable and loving to me. But at least it ended at 11.
So then you got saved.
Yes.
Became a Christian later, and was in a church that...
Yes. Most people looking at me from the outside would have thought that I was probably relatively okay. I mean, I went through college. I held a professional job as a social worker. I had gotten married. But if you knew me well enough, which wasn't hardly anybody, because I was very good at hiding my feelings and my fears, over particularly my teenage years, I had gotten into drugs and cutting and had every food disorder, mostly because I just emotionally couldn't handle it. Those of you who know anything about kids experiencing trauma, the most common way for kids to do it is just to kind of shut down emotionally. Because you can't handle it, you don't know how to process it. And I was depressed all of my life, even after becoming a Christian, and had several suicidal attempts. And I had flashbacks similar to people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, because you can get that from abuse as well. And then I got saved when I was 19 years old. And I was very confident and totally understood that Jesus died in my place and I was going to heaven. But unfortunately, I got into this church that was very legalistic and really controlling. So I eventually kind of overcame my fear to ask the pastors there for help. And basically what I was told is this was happening to me because I needed to read the word more, I needed to memorize, that there was some hidden sin in my life. And so it kind of became, okay, if you can have quiet time for an hour, will 2 hours make it go away? Or what's wrong with me? What do I have to do kind of thing, instead of looking to God. And I had always had this feeling after I was saved, until actually whenever we started this, that I was kind of the object of God's hot displeasure, because bad stuff happened to me. And they're telling me that I needed to do something more, just kind of added to that. And I had tried traditional counseling after the thing with the pastor didn't work. And the thing that was really, really frustrating to me is I knew what the truth was. And I could quote it to you, give you line and verse. I knew what it was, but when it came to actually applying it to my life, it didn't work. It didn't make any difference.
Yeah. Jane, talk a little bit more about how this did affect you. You've talked a little bit about just your fears. It just created a tremendous amount of fear.
I always had this a constant fear, and again, I just thought this was normal, so it was nothing particularly to me. I just had a constant fear of what the next bad thing was going to happen to me. So if you were at my house, you would know I lock every door, every window. I had all the lights on in the house, including like closets and all that stuff. And I kind of had some odd things that I really never figured out why until later, as we were going through prayer counseling. It was connected with something that had actually happened. But all my life, until a few years ago, I closed my eyes in the shower, and I wouldn't go into a closet. I'd like stand on the outside. And actually, when I went to buy a house, I went to buy a house that had any walk-in closets. But just some odd things that I thought were just odd eccentricities to me, and didn't really think about it. And I also had a lot of flashbacks, but most people probably think that you're seeing an actual event happen, but what you actually see is a flash of just a place, a person, something very short. And in my mind, it didn't actually connect with anything. It created a great deal of fear, but I might have recognized the place and the person, but I didn't really know why that would make me afraid. So I learned to do all these things just to cope with it so that I could function relatively normally.
And that kind of relates to the nightmares that were every night, right?
Yeah. And again, I just thought it was really normal that everybody must have nightmares multiple times a night. And I remember it was actually shortly after I came to New Life. We were at a life groupy kind of thing, and somebody was talking, an adult was talking about their child having nightmares. And I said, oh yeah, I have nightmares all the time too. And everybody turned and looked at me, which made me think, okay, apparently everybody doesn't. And I said, well, don't you guys? And they were all like, no, not since we were little kids. I'm like, oh, all right.
One final effect that I have never seen before was how you would shut down. Mentally, you would go into a catatonic state. And you talked about how you would, once you get off work on Friday, you'd go home and what?
Well, I just thought this was a normal thing, that everybody did it. When I was really stressed out or something in my current life, I always just said it was kind of shutting down, but it's like emotionally, physically, there were times that I couldn't even remember what I had done. For the weekend, I know I had probably been in the house and stayed there, but where that came from is, again, when you're 6 years old, you don't really have any way to process or stop abuse, or at least that's what I thought. And so my way of handling it was just to shut down and pretend I wasn't there. And so I was very good at that I would just completely shut down and nothing would have an emotional impact on me because I shut down. And I remember the first time we actually did PC, they had the difficulty because I kept saying, well, I'm not there. Because the way that I pictured it in my mind was that I was an observer on the outside of something that was happening to somebody who looked just like me and was in my house, my dad, my uncle kind of thing, but I was not there. I was just an observer on the outside. And now I know that a young child can actually train their mind to do that, to so disconnect from what's happening that it's like you are physically not there. I mean, it still had all the emotional impact and stuff on me, but physically, I so disconnected. And so as I got older, that was kind of my way of handling stress, is when things got really stressful, I just kind of disconnect and wouldn't really be there, to the point that sometimes I didn't even remember.
Jane, I remember during this time, too, that you would be frustrated and share that you felt you just couldn't cope with stress very well, that it would be little things that would kind of put you over the edge.
Yeah. Because when I'm looking at it again, because I was kind of disconnected from all this stuff that happened, I just kept thinking, well, I don't have very good coping skills. That's why when I'm a Christian, and I know the truth, I should be able to connect enough with God to cope with things, but I was unable to. And so it seemed to me that little things, what I thought were little things, relatively speaking, I suppose, that I would cope with it by the disconnecting. Or actually, at the beginning of this, I still had some of the food issues and stuff. So I really felt like I didn't. But now looking back on it, I realized I had incredible coping skills that I was able to function and stuff, even though I had all that unresolved stuff.
I think there's a couple of things that kind of illustrates just how traumatic this stuff was. One was the disconnecting. And, when Jane would come for a counseling appointment and we would start talking about her past, she literally would disconnect. What that would look like is she's just staring into space, and you can go like this. She's not there. She's gone. And her eyes are open, but she's gone. She's somewhere else. And the trauma that she experienced and she's trying to connect to in order to resolve it is so overwhelming that she has to disconnect. She can't handle it. And the second thing, Jane, was your amazing ability to suppress all this. Maybe give a few illustrations concerning even your dad and this priest about some things that illustrate how the God-given ability that he gave you to suppress this stuff because you couldn't handle it without help.
I had some memory of the stuff that had happened when I was older, when I was 10 and 11. But all I had were flashbacks of the other stuff that didn't really connect to anything to me. But I'd have some strange, probably some of the more noticeable things about how much I had disconnected is, as I said, my parents were divorced. And after those incidents, the sexual abuse stuff, my dad, I never saw him again until I was graduating from high school, and he showed up there. And then the next time I saw him was when we had gotten a call. We were adults. I was in my 20s. And that he had had a stroke, and he wasn't cognizant enough to say who he wanted called. And they called his kids, which was kind of logical. And my other siblings would not go down there. Although they hadn't experienced the sexual abuse, they had the physical abuse, and they wouldn't go down there. But I was a Christian by this time and had already forgiven. And I went down there, and I don't know if you've ever been around anybody who has a stroke, but they're very emotionally labile and start talking about all of this stuff, usually traumatic stuff. And when I walked in, and after he understood who I was, because he hadn't seen me for a long time, that I was Jane, his daughter and stuff, he started saying how sorry he was and sobbing, will you please forgive me? And I didn't even know what he was talking about. And I just kept saying, yeah, okay, I forgive you. I actually wasn't really even sure, but it seemed to comfort him that I was saying that I was forgiving him. And now years later, because I think I was nearly 40 by this time, my mom was in the hospital, and it was Mercy Hospital. And if you're a Catholic, the priest that's kind of like the chaplain person at the hospital will come up and see you. So I'm in the room with my mom and my sister, is there too, and the priest that had sexually abused me came in the room. And it was a really weird feeling because I just kind of immediately panicked and fearful and wanted to leave the room.
But you didn't know why.
But I had no idea why. And my sister, who is like 5 years older than me, she obviously noticed that something was different in my response. And when he left, she said, "Now you can't possibly still be afraid of this priest." And lots of kids were afraid of him. I don't know if he was really big, but he seemed really big when I was little. And when he came in, he was an old man with a walker, keep in mind. So there was no thing. But my sister says to me, "You can't possibly be still afraid of him." And then she said, "Well, I heard that he had abused some kids at school." And again, I'm not saying anything. And my sister finally got the cue that maybe something was a little off there, but she said, "Is something wrong?" And I'm like, "No," because I didn't actually know what was wrong. I just knew that I was afraid of him.
And that's by God's design, to allow a 6, 7, 10-year-old kid to suppress something that painful because they can't process it. But over time, God allows that to start loosening because now you're old enough to deal with it, and he starts letting it come back to the surface and bubble to the surface because now you're able to deal with it. But that's by God's own design. But it was just amazing. God, in a sense, by his own design, protected you a great deal because you would have gone absolutely crazy if you didn't have that ability. Well, let's talk about what prompted you to get help.
Well, as I got older, and one of the things I kind of significantly had to understand before I think that I was able to process it is, that question Kurt asked a while ago about making your list about the reasons why God loved you and why he didn't? Well, he actually gave that sermon probably 10 years ago or something. I can't remember how long it was, but he said the same thing. And I had made my list, and I had a list of about 20 of why he didn't love me, and I had one on the other side. I knew he died for me. But in that process, and he said, if your list is longer on the God doesn't love you side, come and talk to me. And I just quit writing at about 20 because I was starting to get embarrassed. But I actually did go talk to him, overcame my fear of going to talk to him, and went and talked to him. And over the course of time, he kind of figured out I didn't really understand what grace was. I understood the grace of the cross to save us, but not that God deals with us in grace all the time. So once I had that understanding of grace, it kind of changed my perspective. And what it created in me was just, I knew something was wrong and I wasn't connecting with God. And I read all these things, particularly in Psalms, about how David reacted to God. And I was afraid of God. I mean, that was my overall feeling towards him, was just being afraid. And then actually what happened is Kurt asked Sherry and I to read this book about the prayer counseling stuff and tell him what we thought about it, because other Great Commission churches had started using it. And when I did, I'm reading this, and remember, I'm a social worker, so I'm reading this and I'm thinking, well, that's silly. What would it have to do with what you're feeling, have anything to do with a memory? That's ridiculous. So anyway, I started thinking about it, and when I did, I kind of got this flood of memory that shocked me and really surprised me, and I wasn't dealing with it very well. And Rebecca, a friend, actually called Kurt and said, "Kurt, you need to do something." And that actually turned into Kurt and Sherry doing the first time that I had PC.
Some people tell us, Jane, that they're struggling with things, but they don't really know what's wrong with them, so they really can't get help. People can't really help them. They need to figure out what's wrong with them before somebody can help them. What would you say to that?
I honestly didn't have any idea. I'm still rattling through my brain that, okay, I must have some hidden sin, or I'm not reading the word enough, I don't know enough scripture or whatever. And it did actually, I can't go talk to somebody about it because I don't even know what it is anymore. I've tried, I haven't been successful, and what I've done to get help has been unsuccessful. But I think I felt that way every single time I had prayer counseling. And as a matter of fact, it would get me to really, when I got to the point of desperation, is when I would ask for help that particular time. But I didn't hardly ever know, I mean, even what the problem was. It may, I may be having these flashbacks, but I can tell you I was standing in a barn. That's all the flashback is. So I just was totally clueless. But even though I was clueless, I obviously had feelings, and the feelings were able to get back to the memory and process.
Well, let me share what the problem is with all of us. And you've heard me say this before. It always, and this is in thousands of hours of counseling, every single person, no matter what problem they have, it always boils down to one thing. They believe a lie about themselves. And a lot of those lies, most of those lies, have been imprinted on us because of things we experienced in the past. Imagine what a 6 or 7-year-old learns is the truth when her dad treats her like that. Okay? And it always boils down to that. That's everybody's problem, and our only problem is that we believe lies about ourselves. If we believed what God believes about us, if we believe the truth, we'd be free of all of it. And you've heard several references here to something we call prayer counseling. I think it's probably more accurately be described as question counseling. That's really what we're doing in these counseling sessions, is asking questions to help you get to where you need to go to get the truth. Because 99% of the time, you do know all the truth that you need to know. It's just not in the right places. It just hasn't been experienced in all the right places. There's places where you didn't experience God, and those places have imprinted you, and you got to go back with Jesus Christ and renew your mind about what happened there, and then you'll be free. Sherry, could you just briefly maybe describe what a typical counseling time looks like?
Okay.
With prayer counseling.
Right. What we usually start with is something that's happened in the recent past, where your response was either out of proportion for the situation, or it was a negative response, when what you would expect as a Christian would be a place where you would have peace, joy, love, one of the fruits of the Spirit. So we start talking about, okay, what happened in that situation and what were you feeling there? And we use those negative feelings as a bridge. Because as Kurt's talked about how our mind, God designed us that our mind can kind of put into our subconscious these things that we can't deal with or process at the time. Our emotions are a bridge to get back there. So when my husband says something to me that I perceive as being critical and I overreact, it's not what he said in that day that I'm reacting to. It's other things from my past where I've also felt criticized. And maybe I came to believe the message that I'm worthless or not as good as other people or whatever. If you asked me, I wouldn't be able to verbalize that because it's all hidden in my subconscious. But I think of it as a train that we keep adding cars. Every time there's an experience that reinforces that lie that was planted, that emotional train gets longer and longer, and so there's a bigger impact. So what we do in this session is we start with something recent. We focus on feeling those emotions, and our mind, God has designed our minds to be able to use that as a connection point. So then there'll be a memory. And sometimes it's really clear, that makes sense that those are connected. And other times it might be like, I don't know, I'm just remembering this time I was in the barn. And it's not obvious on the surface how that is at all connected to perceiving that my husband spoke harshly to me. So we talk about that memory, and as a facilitator, what our goal is to listen to what is there the person believe about what happened there that doesn't line up with what God says in Scripture. And so when we hit on that, when we hear, well, I was alone, or I'm worthless, or there's a myriad of other lies that are there, then we stop and we ask, is that what God would say? Is that what God says about you? And there's something that's hard to explain. I mean, I think it's just God at work in this process, that when we can see the lie for what it is in that memory, and recognize what the truth is there, it sets us free. It's truth we already know, as Jane talked about. She could have told you all of these truths, but for some reason, realizing it at that place where you didn't have that truth as a younger person is like a key. There's a lock that's opened, and that lie no longer, Satan can't deceive you in the same way. That lie no longer has power over you. So that's what we're doing in the process.
And so many of you who have done prayer counseling with us know that it's just that simple, and you've experienced that very thing. However, let me just mention that with Jane, again, she's different. And unique, okay, special. Jane's special. And, typically our counseling times will last an hour, maybe hour and a half, maybe maximum 2 hours. With Jane, this was a 3-year process of, to our recollection, meeting almost every week, oftentimes twice a week. And I never remember an appointment lasting less than 4 hours. Most of them were 6 hours, some of them 8 hours. And oftentimes, particularly in the beginning of this process, Jane would walk in and her wrist would already be cut, bleeding on my carpet.
Sorry.
She would already be in that disconnected state where she's just walking in like a zombie. And, okay, she sits down. What are we going to do? And the reason I share that is because, again, I often tell people who we are helping, they feel hopeless. They feel like, my goodness, I've got way too much stuff here. This is going to be way too long a journey. This is going to be way too hard. This is going to be, you're not going to be able to help me. This is going to be too overwhelming for you and me. And it's nonsense. I don't know why God did it this way. I don't know why. We were just kind of learning how to help people with this type of stuff. We were amateurs. And God gave us Jane. And we were overwhelmed. It was sink or swim. I mean, we were totally overwhelmed. And through that process, we became experts. We became experts in how to help people, so that now 99% of the people that we help, there's no comparison. They're not even close to how difficult the things we had to work through with Jane. I don't know why God did it that way, but once you've killed Goliath, killing an insect is nothing. And I don't mean to diminish any of your difficulties and the journey that you're on to be free, but I'm just telling you, this is one reason we wanted Jane to share her testimony, is because this was a Goliath. And again, one of the reasons it would take 6 hours to have Jane experience some freedom in an appointment is because it was so excruciatingly painful for her to share her story. For her just to open her mouth and be honest about what actually happened to her would take 6 hours. Look at her today. When, before, she couldn't even do it in front of 2 people in the privacy of an office. Today, she can do it in public in front of all of you, and she's eager to do so. She wants to do this. That is freedom. That is amazing freedom. We want to, in the second part of this, we want to just quickly cover some what we call guardian lies. Guardian lies. So the core lie that we're struggling with is, one, I'm worthless, I'm alone, I'm dirty, I'm hopeless, whatever. That's the core lie that's affecting and controlling your life, and that was some of those were controlling Jane's life. But there's these guardian lies outside of that is protecting this core lie. You can't share this with anybody, those types of things. And Jane, we've written down several of these. Maybe you could talk about some of these, some of the guardian lies that we faced when we were helping you.
Well, we kind of grouped them when we were talking about them, but the major lies that I had always believed about God was that I was beyond even the help of God, and that I was too broken to even be repaired. But I also just believed there really was no hope and no one helps. There would be no help, that no one loved me and there was no place that was safe, that people will think less of me if they knew about that I was wasting Kurt and Sherry's time, that And really, the core of stuff is usually what you believe about yourself. And I just believed I was all alone and there was no way out, that the darkness had already overwhelmed me and I was stuck there. I had a lot of shame, as everyone does who's been sexually abused. I didn't think that I could even do it. And the big thing was that I just thought there would be no end, because every time I'd experience this amazing freedom, and yet I'd get back in that same place again where I'm feeling overwhelmed by feelings.
But there was an end.
There was an end.
And we were all really glad there was an end.
More towards the end, I started joking, I think that maybe this really was the end. But mostly it wasn't. But it did get there eventually.
And through that process, though, Kurt kept reminding you that there was a finite number of abuse experiences that you encountered of a traumatic. So even though it seems overwhelming, and even though it seems like there's always another one, the abuse had stopped. So there was going to be a time where it ended. And so I think that helped all of us to keep going, remembering. And God was gracious. And in your case, we kind of followed a chronological path. So we could tell that, yes, we are getting closer to the end. But that's hopeful, too. You know, no matter what you've experienced, there is an end to it.
I do remember it was a little fascinating that the last session that we had, that we needed to have to set her free from her past, was she remembering leaving her uncle's farm, leaving that place. And it really was chronological. And I just remember this picture of she's leaving the farm, and she was also leaving that past life behind. Not just in her memories, but spiritually, in her mind. It was over. It was gone. It was in her past and not a part of her anymore. And God did that for her. Jane, this is obviously, and we don't kid people, this is a painful process. This is a lot of hard work. What helped you keep going to renew your mind about your past?
There were a couple of things, but the thing that initiated it, of course, was just feeling desperate to please God. And I knew that I was falling short of that. And so that desire to please God kept me going. But, and after I started going through it all, I realized that I didn't have to cope with things, that there was something better than coping. That I really could be free of it and not have to cope with the stuff every day. And really, once I began to experience the freedom, I knew it was there. I knew these things that we had dealt with, that I could think about them, they brought no pain, that they were over. But the real catch for me was, as I went through this process, that feeling of always feeling like I was falling short, I came to realize over time that I felt like that because I desired to give God my whole heart, but I realized I didn't even possess it myself. And as I began to get more healed and was able to turn that part of my life over to God, the experience of God's love and that intimacy and the nearness of God was like overwhelming. And what it created in me, kind of this desire to keep going, to be closer. I want to draw nearer. So it always moved me kind of past thinking about, okay, this part was really painful, bad, but I moved beyond it. And what was beyond it was way, way, way more worth than what I had to go through to get there.
So how would you, this was incredibly painful. A lot of hard work. How would you summarize, because you've told me this before, and others have, I wouldn't trade that for anything. I wouldn't trade what I went through for anything. How can you possibly say that? Why would you say that?
You know, there is I know this probably sounds really weird, and not everybody who's been through things that are bad and hard, you know, whenever I'd say to people, why do bad things happen to us? And some people seem to have more bad things than others. Honestly, they do. I mean, it's not just a judgment thing. I mean, worse things do happen to some people. And people would always say things like, oh, well, it's God's will, or God can overcome it. And honestly, all that stuff seemed pretty trite to me, those answers, because it didn't match the pain that I had experienced. But what I came to realize is, there's lots of Psalms and stuff that talk about this, but I never would have really realized it until I had experienced it, that your own wounding kind of gives you the opportunity for God to fill that place. And that knowing God and that nearness of God really does make it all worthwhile. Now, if I could have learned that in another way, I would have been happy to. But if hardship is indeed the way that you learn that, then it was worth it.
So, Jan, we've alluded to how this has affected your life in terms of the freedom that you experience now, but what are some specifics in terms of that freedom?
The coolest thing for me was all of my life I'd wake up as, those first moments of consciousness, and I would immediately start getting bombarded with negative thoughts about myself, about God, and if I didn't engage the battle and start trying to run through the verses and stuff, I'd kind of lose it for the day. I knew that already, so I immediately had to start doing that, or I would fall into a pretty bad pattern for the day, and it would take me a long time to get out of it. And one of the things that amazed me is as I went through this, that just went away. That I'd wake up in the morning, and instead of having that instant onslaught from Satan, I'd be thinking of a psalm or the verse I'd been thinking about last night, or thinking about God. And, at first this may sound weird to you, but at first I thought something was kind of wrong with me. And what I realized was that I was just happy. And it was kind of an unusual experience for me to just be happy for no reason. That I just woke up that way and I felt that way all the time. But then as time went on, I quit having nightmares, and I rarely have them anymore. And I don't have any flashbacks at all anymore. But all those kind of weird fears as we went through the thing, I told these guys this after we had kind of gone through this memory that had involved the shower and why I was closing my eyes in the shower. Well, the next morning, I wasn't really thinking about it, but I didn't close my eyes. And if you can imagine going into a shower and never closing your eyes, I got soap in my eyes, and I had these little tiny square things, and I'd turn around trying to get the soap out of my eyes. I got kind of dizzy watching the tiles go by because I had never opened my eyes in the shower before. So it was just kind of a weird experience for me. And that the fear of closets kind of went away. My light bill went down because I didn't have to turn on every light in the house. And they just kind of fell away. It wasn't even that I thought, oh, I don't need to turn the lights on anymore. I just didn't. I didn't think that I have to open my eyes. I just didn't. So they just kind of fell away on their own, kind of without my even hardly knowing it. And all of those things that I knew as intellectual truth, all those verses that I knew and stuff, they actually, instead of just knowing them intellectually, I experienced them as I walked them out, and they applied to my life. And instead of having a constant battle to try to keep my mind right, to try to not think on those negative thoughts and stuff, it's like, not that I know that our battle is never over, but my part of the battle is if Satan throws something at me, just to remember this is true, and I believe it, and that's it. It's not this constant, okay, I got to keep saying this, I got to keep doing this, I got to pull out my Bible, I'll walk and think about it, trying to get my mind in the right place so that I don't fall into that darkness part again.
You and I had some conversations about trust, too.
Well, Sherry and I, as I got more comfortable talking about things, would have these conversations just over lunch or when we were doing something. And we had this conversation one time where I said to her, well, why is it that you do trust people? And she looks at me with this odd sort of look and say, well, why wouldn't you? And I'm trying to figure out what's the skill here that I have to learn so that I would trust people when I meet them. And she's trying to figure out, well, why wouldn't you? We had this total disconnect of how to explain to each other because we are on two separate levels. And now I can say that I couldn't tell you what even happened or that I even think about it. And now, yes, of course, I trust people at first and they have to lose my trust. Which is what I think most people probably experience. But we kind of experienced a lot of those things, like, well, why wouldn't you lock your doors all day long? And when I moved next door to, some of you guys know Ben Dixon's, and I lived next door to them, their kids were little, and they would want to come play with the dog all the time. They were used to just walking in the house. Well, I always had the door locked, so you couldn't just walk in our house and stuff. And over time, it's like it didn't make any difference to me if it was locked or if it was not. I wasn't checking. I wasn't doing all these things to make sure I was safe. When I'd come home at night, I'd have to kind of walk through the house and make sure everything was safe, turn on all the lights and stuff. But I just quit doing it, not necessarily because I thought, oh, I don't need to do that anymore. It just kind of falls away.
So you're now experiencing this wonderful freedom. It's permanent. It's effortless. Really. It's just automatic. And it's this wonderful freedom. But not everything's perfect, right?
Yes.
What are some residual things going on here?
Probably the biggest hit for me was, some of you know, about 5 years ago, I began to experience some back problems and a lot of pain. And as we went through all these tests and stuff, finally one of the doctors decided that they are going to do a complete x-ray of my spine. Well, then he comes back and tells me that I have 3 breaks. I've had 3 fractures in my spine. And now it didn't heal right. It's crooked. There's arthritis. There's calcification around them. And that's what's causing the pain that I'm experiencing. And it's going to get worse as I age. And he's asking me, well, were you in a car accident? Did something, happen to you where you were really severely injured and stuff? And I'm sitting there saying, no. Thankfully, I did not think of it when I was in the doctor's office. But as soon as I walked out of the doctor's office, of course, I remembered being thrown up against something and my legs going completely numb and being thrown or hit and losing consciousness with pain in my arms and legs or losing feeling in them. And I realized that the abuse had caused the fractures, of course. I had never been in an accident. I'd never had anything else happen. When you're little, and when I was going through these memories, how when you're little, sometimes things seem big, like people seem really huge and things seem really far away and stuff. And so as I went through these memories, I thought, maybe they weren't as bad as I actually was remembering. They were just the thoughts or the interpretations of a child. But this thing kind of reinforced to me that they were indeed as bad as I remember, bad enough to break your spine in 3 places. But, I remember I called Kurt and I called Sherry and I told him about it. And really in about 24 hours, I was okay again. I had realized, I'd forgiven these people long ago. And God had healed me of all this stuff. And really, really good things did happen from it. And I don't know if they would have happened in other ways that I would have come to know God as intimately as I do now. But it didn't really matter because God had taken it and had, in fact, made it into something good. And the other thing is that I don't know if people have the expectation that after you've kind of processed memories and stuff that you shouldn't remember the bad stuff anymore. I could remember it. I can remember it all, and I can tell you all. The difference is it does not cause me any pain to tell you all. As a matter of fact, when I was trying to just collect my thoughts so that I wouldn't forget, and we had talked about different things to make sure to say kind of stuff, when I was going through it, I actually got kind of emotional really emotional about it. And I realized that I was emotional because of how that intimacy with God and how much God had actually done in my life. Looking at it on paper and putting it in one place, I'm just amazed at how gracious and how merciful that God is and how faithful He is. Even though, I mean, it took me a while to get here, and maybe it was just needing people to be around me who could actually help me get through it. But it really, I mean, it amazes me.
I feel like just ending right there. I want to share a few practical applications from this to wrap up here. But Jane, what advice would you give someone who is not sure if they should get help?
You know, the first thing that I would say is there's really nothing to lose. I mean, we've all been in places we can't get out of ourselves, and you can't get out of it, and you need help. And I know we're pretty independent in America, and we're taught to be independent and all that stuff, but God made the body for that very reason, that we would have each other and be supporting each other and helping one another in our weaknesses so that we can go on to help other people. And the other thing that I'm not sure why people have this fear, but a lot of people have expressed to me, well, they're afraid of what they might find in there. And, I got to say that even though, so I had these flashbacks of places and things, they didn't mean anything to me, just brought really a lot of fear and panic. But, as the memories came flooding back, the detail of all of this stuff, there was nothing strange about it. It was like, I always knew it. It was always just there in the back of my mind. I had just disconnected from it. There was nothing strange about it, nothing overwhelming. It was just as normal as any other memory that I ended up having. So there was nothing to be afraid of, I guess, is what I'm saying. Whatever is there is already there, and it's either we process it or it continues to impact our life. Because even though I didn't remember the detail of all of that stuff, it has significantly impacted my life. I had not remembered a time that I was not pretty significantly depressed. And I hadn't remembered a time when I fought the negative stuff. And before I was saved, it just flooded through me, and I made no attempt to stop. But boy, you really notice it when you try to stop it. So it has a major impact on your life, whether you want to deal with it or not. So you can either deal with the impact or you can deal with the pain for however long it takes, and move beyond it. So there's nothing to fear about it. In the end, you do come to the other end. I know one of my big fears of not processing that took us a while sometime to get through is I always had this overwhelming fear that I was going to be stuck in the pain, not necessarily the memory, but the pain of it, and I wouldn't be able to move beyond it. But, knowing that God is there and you're moving through. And each time, I guess, that I moved through, it gave me a little more confidence, although I know that I struggled with that for a long time, that I would get stuck there. Because there had been times in my life that I had been overwhelmed by the pain of it. And I knew that. Even though I didn't know all of the memories, I very much knew that I had been stuck in the pain. And that's kind of how the drugs and the cutting and eating disorders and stuff had come to be, and I didn't want to be there again. But I never got stuck.
Amen. Sherry, one concern we had about sharing this testimony was that people might feel like what happened to me is not a big deal and it shouldn't be affecting me so much, and that other people need help worse than I do. What would you say to that?
Jane is often the person that I go to for prayer counseling, and we've laughed before. I said, I've had 5 traumatic events in my life, but they just keep cycling up more and more lies. And so it's not a comparison game. We are all affected differently. We've all had traumatic things that have happened to us on some level. and they affect us deeply, regardless of, the goal isn't to line them up from worst to least. If they're hurting you, if they're affecting your life, then it's good to deal with them. And it doesn't matter if somebody else would say that was more traumatic or less traumatic, or it should or shouldn't bother you. God has truth to set us free, because that's where Satan has a foothold. And so no trauma is too minimal if it's negatively affecting you, and none is too large.
And I want to add to that too, that it really, two kids in the same family can experience the very same thing, and one kid will have no problem with it, and the other kid will be traumatically affected by it. It has nothing to do actually with the events. It has to do with what you believed about that event that makes it traumatic. So our job as parents is to help our kids go through traumatic events so this kind of stuff doesn't happen to them. But remember, it really is what you believed about it. I remember this one incident of abuse, and yes, I can tell you now that it was horrible sexual abuse and then some violence. There was blood everywhere. But the thing that was traumatic about this thing is I'd had this bear. My sisters and brother called it Pinky Stinky. But, it's the kind of bear that has no eyes, no ears. The arms had fallen off. Mom sewed it back up a zillion times. But it was kind of my bear kind of thing, and I had taken it to my dad's house. And the traumatic part for me, and the thing that I had to process, was that he tore the head off of it and threw it away. Now, that's not in the scheme of things that happened that day of the abuse and the violence and the blood everywhere, nobody would have probably picked up that tearing the head off the bear and throwing it away being the traumatic event. Well, that was the traumatic event for me.
That brings up, too, just that we all interpret things differently. And some of us are more sensitive, and some of us are slower to say things out loud, especially as little children. I have two children. One of mine always spoke what they were thinking, so I could tell. The other one is just more private. And so I can see sometimes there's something that's not connecting correctly, but I don't know exactly what it is. And so that's what we find as we work with it. There are some people that, again, the sibling, oh yeah, I remember that. That wasn't a big deal. But just some of us look at things differently and are more impacted by them, and maybe more susceptible to take in some of those things, those lies that Satan's whispering to us, and they take root.
One of the things that I wanted to add was that obviously, God did not begin healing people's hearts when prayer counseling came along. I think that God has been doing this all along in people's lives. Every time that we realize we're believing a lie and we're able to replace it to truth, and remembering things like, oh, I remember when I first thought that and where that came from. And I know now when stuff comes up, that's exactly what I do, and I process it myself if something happens to come up. So there's nothing really strange about this. It's exactly what it says in Romans, where it says we're transformed by the renewing of our minds. And God has been doing that all along. It's just that I probably never would have gone through this. I don't think that I even then had the capability to process or even access it, for that matter, because I didn't even know where it was coming from. And I needed help. It goes a lot quicker having people help you that are just asking you questions to get you to the right place to recognize the lies and find the truth. So don't even think of it as anything weird. And a lot of you that have done counseling with me know that a lot of times we're just having conversation, and we're talking and recognizing lies and feelings and memories. It's pretty normal, just the normal thing.
One of the things that people said they might be concerned about if we shared this testimony is that we'd be inundated with people who want help. By the way, that's why we're sharing this. We want to help more people. And we want New Life Community Church to be a place where we understand, look, freedom is our God-given right, and it's available, and it's God's will for your life, but you may need a little bit of help. Jane and Cheryl, what would you say to people who say, well, I don't, we don't have the time, we don't have the energy to help everybody. They don't want to overwhelm us. What would you say about that?
Well, I know for me that obviously we all have limits, to our time and stuff like that. But I just want to say that I think it's the coolest thing in the world to be able to bring somebody through that process and see them find truth and find some degree of freedom. It actually energizes me. There is nothing, it's not work, it's not hard. It actually, for a couple of weeks when I was after I married my very handsome husband over there, and went on my honeymoon and stuff, I hadn't done it for a few weeks, and then when I did it for the first time, that energy and all of that stuff comes back that I get from doing it.
I should have gone first. She stole my answer. No, I think at my house when I come home from a session, my husband can tell because I'm like, oh, yeah. Not that I'm telling him what happened, but it revives something. I also personally find it's a privilege to be able to come before God and help people walk through this process. And the trust that you have to have in us, we don't take that lightly. We are very appreciative of being able to be God's vessels, to be able to help his children get more freedom, and then to see the changes as you move forward. Just to see the joy and the peace and the freedom is I know a word we keep coming back to. So that's very rewarding and very satisfying. And that's one of the reasons I love to continue to do this.
In your bulletin this morning is a handout that kind of outlines the biblical basis for this process and even questions on the back that we have people at New Life who are doing this with themselves. I have individuals who call me once in a while and say, hey, yeah, Kurt, I was driving down the road. This feeling came over me. I connected with a memory, resolved it with Jesus, and got free. Just wanted to let you know. See you later. And we have couples that are doing this together, that they've experienced this, and now they do it together. So we don't want to give the impression that you have to have an expert all the time. As Jane mentioned, this is something that David is doing in the Psalms with himself. He's crying out to God, being honest about how he feels, and receiving the truth of Jesus to set him free. But if you need help, we want to be able to help you. And of course, time and energy is limited. But let me tell you something. We have, for the size of our church, I've said this before, we have more expert counseling capacity at New Life Community Church than any church I'm aware of anywhere. For the size of our church, the number of expert counselors available is amazing. This is a very gifted church. And Gwenda Thomas, who has a counseling ministry in our building, uses this same process to help people, and she's not here today. But we have a lot of help available. We may not be able to help you tomorrow, but we want to know if you need help. And you just need to email. The best way is just to email to encouragement@newlifecr.com, encouragement@newlifecr.com, and we want to start praying for you and trying to help you. Let's go ahead and pray.
Kurt, can I share one
Yes,
thing?
Jane wants to share one more
I want to
thing.
share one more thing. From the time that I became a Christian, I was really, you know how you read verses sometimes and it just kind of catches you. And mine was John 8:36, where it says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And even though I didn't know really how bound up I was, that verse just always enticed me, and I thought I must be missing some big truth here about God. But as I went through this process, I began to realize that there is no great big truth out there, that really what he was talking about was, as we replace each lie with truth, the sum of his word is truth, it says somewhere in Psalms, but as we replace each lie with truth, then we become free. And that's what Jesus came for.
Let's pray. Father, we are not naive about the power of our enemy. He rules this world. He ruled Jane's dad and her life and tried to destroy her, literally. We are not naive that we have a very powerful enemy. But today we are thankful that we can say with absolute confidence we have an even more powerful Savior. The devil is no match for his truth. I have seen the devil run with his tail tucked between his legs so many times. When the truth comes, he can't handle it. Jesus, would you help us? Would you help our church? Would you help anyone listening or watching this video? Would you help them to know that you want them to be free and that they can be, that they can renew their mind and be transformed into a different person, and that you would help them find help to do so. We just want the devil to win less, Lord, and for you to win more and for you to be more glorified in these situations. We thank you for what you've given New Life Community Church. Lord, as we pray often, we don't want the devil to hide here. We want him to be exposed, and we want to beat him. We want to annihilate him. We want to kick him out of our lives. Thank you for giving us the truth to do that. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Have a great week. We hope to see you next week for Mother's Day.